Deep in the Congo Basin, witnesses now claim the Mokele Mbembe is real, and the truth behind its return is far more terrifying than legend ever imagined.
In the heart of Africa lies a world few have truly seen, the Congo Basin, a vast, untouched wilderness so immense even satellites can't fully map it.
Dinosaur lives on, not in the picture books, but deep in the swamps of the African jungle.
But deep within this green ocean, whispers tell of something ancient.
That they call Mokele Mbembe, and he's this gigantic dinosaur-type brontosaurus animal. He's got a long neck.
A creature said to be massive, elusive, and older than time itself. Locals call it Mokele Mbembe, the one who stops the flow of rivers.
If anyone sees a Mokele Mbembe and then reports or talks about it, he will surely die.
So what is this thing? A legend? A survivor from another age? And if it's real, what does that mean for modern science and for us? A legend that is coming back to life. Over the past few years, reports of a massive dinosaur-like creature have surged once again across the Congo Basin. And what's even more worrisome? The stories sound almost identical to those told a century ago. A smooth-skinned giant, with a neck as long as a serpent, and the power to disappear beneath the water without a trace, before anybody could get a good look at it. For decades, in fact, as old as before colonial rule, the name Mokele Mbembe has existed somewhere between legend and obsession. A creature some believe to be a surviving sauropod, hidden in one of the most remote ecosystems on Earth. Of course, there have always been doubters who dismissed it as nothing more than folklore. But this time, it's different. Something has changed. Previous sightings have always come from the deep, untouched jungle. But now, they're clustered along freshly deforested riverbanks, places where the forest has been cut back, where human activity is pushing further inland than ever before. Logging camps, oil exploration zones, expanding settlements. As the forest retreats, the legend advances. But now, this isn't just some mythical folklore any longer. This concerns all of us, deeply. The question remains, could something prehistoric still be alive out here? To answer that, we need to understand what's happening to the forest itself. The thing is, as Earth's second-largest rainforest, second only to the Amazon, the Congo Basin spans 1,500 miles across 6 Central African nations. For centuries, vast regions remained unreachable, except by weeks of canoe travel. But between 2000 to 2016, the region lost forest area the size of the United Kingdom. The result? New roads now penetrate regions that were blank spots on maps just 2 decades ago. And it's here, at the intersection of legend and land use, that the stories of Mokele Mbembe have resurfaced with new intensity. Are these encounters evidence of a hidden giant finally being disturbed by human expansion? Or are they the echoes of a myth being reshaped by modern change? For cryptozoologists, this is a moment of renewed excitement and maybe skepticism. For conservationists, it's something different entirely, a sign of impending doom. For them, this only means one thing. The boundaries between human spaces and wild spaces are collapsing, creating encounters that blur reality and legend. Either way, there's something going on here, and it draws us back to the river. A century of consistent accounts. For most of the world, Mokele Mbembe lives only in whispers and blurry sketches. But for the inhabitants of the Congo Basin, it's part of everyday geography. These rivers, swamps, and forest clearings aren't just physical spaces. They're alive with stories. And sometimes, those stories collide with reality in unsettling ways. It's happened once before, in 2003 actually. Selah Abongo, a Congolese conservationist, came across something that changed her life forever. At the time, she was working as a field worker investigating an Ebola outbreak deep inside the forest. Then one day, while she was crossing a narrow river at dusk, the water shifted. Beneath the surface, a massive, smooth-skinned shape glided across. It was silent, too large to identify, and was gone before she could react. When she shared her experience with the locals she was working with, they didn't hesitate to give it a name. They told her she'd just seen the legendary beast, a dinosaur they called Mokele Mbembe. Stories about it have existed as far back as the late 1700s, when the French came to Africa. These earliest tales, at least in their printed, verifiable form, come from French missionary Liévin Bonaventure Proyart's 1776 book, History of Loango, Kakonga, and Other Kingdoms in Africa. In it, Bonaventure talked about the various flora, fauna, and native inhabitants he'd met during his time there in the Congo River region. But then, he also mentioned something else, something far more disturbing than it was interesting. Bonaventure claimed to have seen enormous footprints in the region. The creature that left the prints was not witnessed, but Bonaventure wrote that it must have been monstrous. The marks of the claws were noted on the ground, and these formed a print about 3 feet in circumference. Nothing was heard about the animal again for a while, until some more than 100 years later, in 1913. This time, it was German Captain Ludwig Freiherr von Stein zu Lausnitz who described it to be of brownish-gray color with a smooth skin, and as big as an elephant, or at least a hippo. But it was its flexible neck that stood out for him. We never exactly heard this story from him, but rather it was reported by Willy Ley in his 1941 book, The Lungfish and the Unicorn. But there's more. Von Stein noted that he would seen the animal's preferred meal, a kind of liana with large white blossoms with a milky sap and apple-like fruits. Also, at the Sambo River, he'd been shown a path said to have been made by the Mokele Mbembe in order to get at its food. The plants he'd been told about were nearby, and the pathway seemed fresh enough, but there were too many tracks of elephants, hippos, and other large mammals, so it was impossible for him to make out a particular spoor with any amount of certainty. Von Stein himself never actually saw this animal, but he'd heard of it from different, independent, verifiable sources. And since everything they said pointed in the same direction, he was led to believe it. The villagers also claimed that this beast had a single long horn on its head, with a tail like an alligator's that could sweep across astonishing distances. It was said to be mainly vegetarian, feeding on the malumbo plant that grew thick along riverbanks. But make no mistake, this was no gentle giant. The creature was fiercely territorial. Anyone who strayed too close to its feeding grounds didn't walk away. In fact, they never got to walk again. The most unsettling part? Witnesses said it killed without eating its victims. That single detail made early explorers believe they were dealing with something more than an animal. Something with intent. Maybe intellect even. They said it lived in underwater caves hidden beneath the labyrinth of rivers that snaked through the Congo Basin. It would only come out to feed or travel, navigating secret waterways no human could trace. Sounds pretty fantastic. But then you take into consideration that these weren't isolated tales. From Cameroon to Gabon, from the Republic of Congo to the Central African Republic, tribes separated by vast distances shared eerily similar descriptions. It was as if they were all talking about the same creature, one that belonged to a lost age. Now, here's where things get very, very worrisome. The stories these villagers told nearly 100 years ago bear very striking similarities to what Obongo claims to have seen. And Obongo isn't the only one who has reported seeing this animal in recent times. Over the past 2 decades, dozens of similar testimonies have emerged from fishermen, loggers, and travelers moving through once isolated forest regions. Some speak of a long neck cutting through the misty surface at dawn. Others describe having seen an enormous back, slick and gray, rising briefly before vanishing. What's striking is how closely these accounts resemble those collected 100 years ago, long before modern communication could spread a single description so widely. This has long passed fairy tale status. This is a matter of utmost importance, because now there's something else linking these encounters: their location. A 2025 National Geographic report shows that the majority of new sightings are happening not in untouched wilderness, but along the edges of human expansion. Places where forests have been cleared for roads, oil exploration, and commercial logging. These regions once hid rivers beneath dense canopy, but now they've been exposed, and animals are encountering humans more often than ever before, which, when you think about it, is sort of expected. The Congo Basin is home to some of the most elusive wildlife on Earth. Forest elephants move quietly through the undergrowth, barely visible sometimes even at close range. The hippos there, too, are able to submerge for minutes at a time, creating the illusion of sudden appearances and disappearances. And there are still other creatures, some of them unaccounted for, that live almost entirely below the waterline. In this kind of environment, fleeting encounters can become stories that live for generations. Different interpretations. Except, for these local communities, this creature isn't just a biological mystery. It's part of their cultural landscape. Folklore in these regions doesn't separate the natural from the supernatural in the way Western thought often does. So, while a creature like the Mokele Mbembe could be a real animal, it might also be a spiritual presence, without contradiction. For many of the rural people, the legend serves as a warning, a reminder that some parts of the forest belong to forces older and larger than humans, and as such, they should be left untouched. For an outside observer, a story like this would be somewhere in between fact or fantasy, never really picking a spot. But on these grounds, they occupy a more complex space. A fisherman who saw a massive gray back rise from the water isn't trying to prove evolution wrong or spark an expedition. He's only just describing what he experienced. Whether scientists believe it or not isn't the point. The story spreads, it settles, and then it becomes part of the collective understanding of the landscape. As the forest changes, these stories don't vanish. Instead, they adapt. Sightings once tied to remote swamps are now happening near new roads. Legends that once belonged only to the bravest of hunters are now being repeated by loggers, surveyors, and even oil workers. The only thing that hasn't changed is the effect. A quiet sense that something ancient is still moving beneath the surface, watching from the edges as the forest gives way. The rise in modern sightings doesn't just tell us about a possible creature. It reveals how humans are rewriting the boundaries of the wild, and how the stories we carry shape what we see. Whether there's a dinosaur in these rivers or not, one thing is clear. People are encountering something they can't explain. And each new story draws the legend further into the present. Von Stein's 1913 reports, published in 1941, fueled decades of expeditions. Throughout the 20th century, Africa became synonymous with the possibility of living dinosaurs. Books like Carl Hagenbeck's 1908 Beasts and Men painted Africa as a land where ancient beasts might still roam, hence merging colonial imagination with cryptozoological fever. Also, you need to remember that it wasn't until 1901 that explorers discovered the okapi, a previously unknown relative of the giraffe that had stripes like a zebra's. British explorer Sir Harry Johnston heard stories from Congo villagers about a mysterious, donkey-like forest creature. After tracking footprints and collecting skin and skull samples, he found it, hidden deep in the dense rainforests of Congo. So, with such an exotic find, optimism was at an all-time high. Explorers were sold on the idea. If Johnston had found this half-giraffe, half-zebra animal, then maybe they could also find the Mokele Mbembe. They left in their droves, searching for the slightest hint of evidence of this creature's existence, hoping to, by doing so, carve their names in the records. Some returned with plaster casts of footprints too large to match any known animals. Others brought sketches drawn from witness descriptions: round bodies, whip-like tails, and heads shaped like snakes. Most came back empty-handed, but full of conviction. The absence of proof had only deepened the mystery. The controversies that stalled research. But as things would eventually turn out, not everyone was looking for the Mokele Mbembe for simple purposes. In the early to mid-20th century, it had become a focal point among adherents of cryptozoology and young Earth creationism. The results were the numerous expeditions we mentioned of earlier, led by cryptozoologists, funded by young Earth creationists and other groups. And why were they doing this, you might ask? Well, they were looking for evidence that would invalidate or at least even contradict the scientific consensus regarding evolution. The words of paleontologist Donald Prothero capture it best. The quest for Mokele Mbembe is part of the effort by creationists to overthrow the theory of evolution and teaching of science by any means possible. Additionally, Prothero noted that the only people looking for Mokele Mbembe are creationist ministers, not wildlife biologists. Deforestation in the basin. But then, even as skepticism grew, one thing kept the legend alive: the Congo Basin itself. It is vast, uncharted, and has been shifting beneath the weight of deforestation for years. Between 2002 and 2023, the Democratic Republic of Congo lost nearly 10% of its tree cover, including some of its most remote wetlands. 10 years before that, between 1990 and 2000, the rainforest lost over 56,000 miles. But it gets worse. In 2022 alone, a tree-covered area of almost 10 miles was lost. That amounts to almost 8,000 football fields of forest cleared every single day. Most of it occurred in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Sure, the people clearing these forests might have good reasons to do so. For most of the people who live here, cutting the forest isn't a matter of greed. It's about survival. More than 75 million people rely on this land for food, fuel, and farming. Families clear small plots to plant cassava, maize, and yams. It's called slash-and-burn agriculture, and it's been practiced for centuries. And it didn't used to be this bad. But of course, as populations grow, the clearings get bigger, the burns more frequent, and the forest has less time to recover. And they're not the only ones. There are the miners, the loggers, the corporations. Hidden deep in the forest are veins of copper, gold, and cobalt, metals that power smartphones, electric cars, and global tech economies. With the astronomical rise of the tech industry in recent years, demand for them has exploded. And of course, that just means an increased appetite for new extraction sites. Logging concessions, both legal and illegal, spread through the basin like spiderwebs. Precious hardwoods like mahogany and okume are cut, sold, and shipped halfway across the world, often faster than local authorities can even register the loss. But now, it's not just the forest that these feelings and burnings are affecting. As the forest retreats, Animals once hidden are forced into new rivers, new encounters, and, most importantly, new myths. Now, of course, you wouldn't expect that these myths would give up themselves so easily. And yet, that hasn't stopped people from trying to find out its hidden mysteries, specifically the ones concerning this beast. In the 80s, American missionary James Jim Powell Jr. and biologist Dr. Roy McCall led one of the most famous modern expeditions. Their destination? The Likuala Swamp, a region so isolated it's been called the last true wilderness on Earth. Local guides described enormous ripples on the water. Fishermen told stories of canoes being flipped by something massive beneath the surface. But despite weeks of searching, no clear footage or physical evidence ever surfaced. And so, like those before him, Mokele returned home empty-handed, but convinced. But it was in 1998 that possibly our most verifiable evidence of this beast came to light. A Japanese film crew was flying over Lake Tele in Congo. They'd been filming footage of the beautiful scenery beneath them when they suddenly caught this on camera. The disturbance in that water was definitely peculiar and didn't seem to be the work of any known causes. But of course, skeptics tried to explain it away, claiming it could be the work of men just paddling canoes, or maybe even a line of swimming elephants. Besides, the video quality was too poor for us to make anything concrete out of. But if you look again, the movement is too thoroughly coordinated for it to be the result of mere chance. That clearly looks like the head of something larger than most things known to us already. The most interesting part of this tale is how different generations of explorers, who have almost no chance of having ever met, give descriptions that are similar to the accounts of different locals, who themselves have been of different generations, and in some cases even live miles from one another. Everyone keeps describing the same creature. It's about the size of a small elephant, with a long neck, and moving silently beneath the current. No bones, no tracks, just the same stories, told again and again. Even in the 21st century, some expeditions have been made into the Congo River, some of them by independent explorers, and others by cooperations such as even the BBC and National Geographic. But yet, even with the latest technology, nothing concrete has been discovered concerning this animal. So now, after a century of rumors, blurry photos, and countless failed expeditions, the story of Mokele Mbembe should have ended a long time ago. But it hasn't. In fact, the reports are increasing. Satellite data, logging routes, and drone footage all point to one disturbing truth. Whatever people are seeing out there, it's moving closer to where humans live. And if that's the case, if this legendary beast is leaping out of the pages of imagination into reality, forced out of its hidden habitation by our deforestation, then we're headed for a deadly collision. And that's the real danger. Yes, the evidence might still be blurry, but the pattern isn't. It's obvious. More forest gone, more sightings reported, and more attacks on boats no one can explain. Maybe the Mokele Mbembe isn't just real. Maybe it's angry too. And if that's true, then what's rising from those waters isn't the past coming back. It's the future warning us to leave.